I'm Susan Regan, host of Connecticut Valley Views. And my guest today is Mike Allen. He is producer and the host of the podcast Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. He interviews experts on a variety of historical topics and also makes public appearances on a number of those topics. Mike has lived in Connecticut for more than 50 years and currently resides in Danbury. Now, I think what we want to have you expand on is the fact that for 10 years you were news director at Radio I-95 FM. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Give us a little background on that and what you did, what your responsibilities were, and so forth.
Sure. Thank you, Susan. Thanks for having me on the program.
Oh, it's a pleasure, real pleasure.
It's great to meet you. I started off in journalism. That's what I went to college for, and worked in commercial radio for 10 years. And I was wondering whether that was going to be the final thing I was going to do with my life. And one day the phone rings and it's the newly elected mayor of Danbury, a guy named Joe Sauer, the late Joe Sauer, unfortunately. And Joe was calling to say, hey, look, I need somebody to do media for me and issues, and you seem to fit that bill. You want to talk. So we did. And next thing you know, I'm the press secretary for the mayor of Danbury. Stayed in local government, actually moved to New York State to work in Rockland County government. So it was county, but I've never worked at the state or federal level, but did government for about 6-7 years. And then got recruited into corporate. So I was working in corporate for 25 years, including the highlight of my life. I got to move to Switzerland for 7 years with my wife and family and work out of Switzerland, which is just a remarkable experience. And then came back to the United States, came to Fairfield County, and have been here ever since. So I retired in 2020, and a guy who I used to work with at the radio station said, Mike, I know you got nothing to do. I know you just retired. Why don't you come on and talk about anything you want to talk about once a week at the radio station? I said, well, Ethan, I appreciate that, but that sounds a little too broad for me. Can we narrow the focus? And I said, I love local history. Can we talk about local history? So we did, started a program called The Place You Live, went very well. And I said, gee, I don't know anything about this podcasting stuff, but let me see if I can figure it out. And it took me 6 months to figure it out, but I started Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path 3 years ago. I've done 175 episodes, about 300,000 downloads since then, and I'm loving it. The only thing I don't like is I made a big mistake at the beginning by painting myself into a corner saying I'll be there with a new episode every week. So no matter what, Thursdays, people are expecting the new episode whether I'm ready or not. So there you go.
How popular is it? How many people do you think you reach?
Oh, like I said, I've had about 300,000 downloads. It's rated right now in PodTrack is the industry standard, and I'm rated in the top 9% of podcasts in the United States.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a great track record. Now, we live in Granby, Connecticut, but one of the ones that kind of intrigued me was the one you did of the witches in Connecticut. Tell us a little bit about that. How long ago did you do that one?
Oh, I forget. I'm not real good with details after I do 175 of these things. Sometimes tend to blend together. But what stands out to me about that one is I interviewed one of my mentors in this area, Walt Woodward. He's the state historian emeritus for Connecticut, and just so knowledgeable about history. You see, I'm not a historian, Susan. I'm a storyteller, a former journalist, and and journalists do history in real time for historians to look at later. So I love history. I love to know about it, but I'm not a historian. Walt Woodward is a historian, and he knew all the stories about the witches. So I interviewed him. He was the expert, and essentially this happened at a time when a very important man in Connecticut's history named John Winthrop was governor. And as he came in, John was, in the 1700s, was very forward thinking on things like science. And he was able to get people to say, you're saying that this is witchcraft. There isn't really witchcraft. We have to stick to the science of things. So he managed to get a lot of the women's sentences commuted, but unfortunately we killed and put to death probably about 10 women.
How were they put to death?
I'm sorry?
How were they put to death?
Yeah, usually hanging.
Wow. So it's a
Yeah.
public affair.
Well, in Fairfield, there's an incredible story. You can go down behind the Fairfield Town Hall, and it's still there. The land is still there. They've not built
Wow.
on it, where there used to be a pond. And
Okay.
what they would do is they would tie you to stones and throw you into the
Oh my
pond.
God.
And if you rose to the top, that meant you were a witch
Oh
because
boy.
somehow you were overcoming this. And if you didn't, they'd have to go in and rescue you and apologize and let you go. So
Oh gee.
this was this was one of
Sorry.
the very strange ways. And everybody talks about. In fact, my coffee mug is from Salem,
Oh,
and my wife just went up to Salem, and everybody talks about the Salem witch trials as if
yes.
that was the big thing. And
Yes,
it was
yes.
a big thing. I'm not poo-pooing it, but Connecticut was way ahead of Salem.
I
Ours
see.
went first.
I see. Now, these witches, what supposedly did they do that they were accusing them of being witches? What occurrences happened because they were there or
There
existed?
was nothing like abracadabra and things vanishing and levitation and all that. It was just people who were oftentimes, unfortunately, single women.
Okay.
And so they were considered, first of all, to be, why aren't they married in those days, which
Okay.
was, strike one
Sure.
against
Sure.
women in those days. And then if anything happened that wasn't, at the time, Connecticut was run by religion. The Congregational Church was
Sure.
essentially the overseer of everything that
Oh,
happened in
that's a
Connecticut.
congregational church. Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, and so they were in charge of who got jobs, who was in government. They sort of called the shots on everything, and if you were not towing the line, a lot of times you came under suspicion inappropriately,
You were
and
an outsider.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's very unfortunate for those ladies. What a terrible situation. What seems to be what are the most popular subjects that you've covered, do you think? I mean, out of your
you know,
reach.
you know,
And your
I,
demographics, is it, from 25 to 80, men, women? Oh,
it is actually younger than 25.
oh,
When I give public talks,
sure.
parents will oftentimes bring their children who are avid fans of the show because I keep it clean.
Yes.
I try and keep it simple. This is not a history class. It's not,
Right.
advanced history, PhD material.
Right.
It's fun stories about history and things that happened. And apparently a lot of children listen to it too. So I keep that in mind as I'm going
So you're
through.
talking about children like high school age?
Even younger. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had kids come in who are in middle school. I've been asked to speak to middle school classes. I just spoke last week to the New Fairfield second graders,
Okay.
who are, some of them are big fans of the podcast. And
Okay.
then everything up to and including, 90-year-olds who, just love
That's great.
history and can't
Yeah.
get enough of it. So it's really very broad. There's no particular demographic number. Um, I would say this, that the topics tend to be like in any podcast, people love mysteries. Oh, they love mysteries.
Yeah, of course.
And in podcasts in general, mystery podcasts tend to be amongst the highest rated. So
Yeah.
when I do, episodes about former, murderers and things like that,
Yeah.
they generally spike pretty high.
Well, that's
But
interesting.
the making of
Serial
Candy,
killers? Serial killers?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, Connecticut was home of the first mass murder in the United States in the
Really?
1700s.
Where did that occur?
Town of Washington in the 1700s. A guy killed his farmhouse, a family in a farmhouse that
Oh,
was
wow.
that was housing him. He was a troubled youth, and he killed them. He got
Wow.
caught and he was hanged in Litchfield.
Wow.
So people found that intriguing.
Yes.
The Pardue brothers.
He was a teenager, killed his family?
It wasn't a teenager killing his family. It was a teenager that was being housed at a
Oh,
farmhouse, and he was
okay.
doing work around the farm for them, and they, gave him a room to live in and food to eat, and he killed them. So that happened in Connecticut. It was the first, mass murder that ever happened in the United States. So stories like that tend to draw attention, but also one of the highest rated, and it still amazes me, is the one I did on New England stone walls. Now I'm still scratching my head on this one because
Okay,
while I enjoyed the topic, the guest was spectacular. I
okay,
found it fascinating. But if you had asked me to predict where that was going to
sure,
come out, I
sure.
would not have put it up near the top. People loved that
What,
episode.
what, what were they built by Irishmen? Because I think that was the skill set they brought over.
So they're so they were built by the farmers who had to clear their land. I mean, the old
Uh-huh.
saying and the old joke about Connecticut, and I think you
Yes,
come from Granby, so you would know this, that our number one natural resource is rocks, right? And so you can't do farming in your yard without moving rocks, and that's what they
right,
did. And for years, people have just said, "Oh yeah, those are beautiful stone walls."
yes.
What this UConn professor has done is taken it to the next level, and now has studied them, categorized them, and gotten them to the point where even in zoning decisions now, when you're talking about land that could be developed, they can come in and say, "Well, wait a second, we have this historic stone wall that
Yes.
meets the criteria because of this, this, and this. We need to think." Is that something we want to do? Do we want to destroy that stone wall? And it was far more fascinating than I anticipated when I went into it, and people just love that. But they also love Candlewood Lake, the making of Candlewood Lake. I mean, here's the largest lake in Connecticut. It's man-made, and what people don't understand about it is they think, oh, it's a beautiful recreational facility. It's a hydroelectric plant. They
Aha.
pump water
Okay.
from the Housatonic River
Okay.
uphill into Candlewood Lake at night when you're sleeping and people aren't using electricity. They
Yeah.
turn on the pumps and pump the water up. Then during the day, when people are awake and extra electricity is needed, they let some of the water out. It falls back down through this
Oh,
tube that takes it to generators that generate electricity.
yes.
And it's a remarkable. It's 100 years old, and people don't understand that this is what the lake does.
Yes.
And the water. I mean, to give you an idea, from the Housatonic River up to the top of Candlewood Lake is 230 feet. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but keep in mind Niagara Falls is 184 feet. So
Okay.
it's higher than Niagara Falls as water
Wow.
comes gushing down to generate electricity and turn turbines. And it's a fascinating story, and people were just gaga about Candlewood Lake.
Yes. Am I correct in saying the stone walls, I think it was quite a skill set. I don't think, well, I don't know. I guess I'm asking you the question. Built with mortar, or are they just, the stones are cut so that they stay up?
So and this is why this professor is so interesting because there's not a simple answer to your question. There's many types of stone walls.
Okay.
Some were just farmers getting the stones out of the way, so they're kind of haphazard. Others are the skilled Irish stone workers
Yes.
and
Those are
Italian
the
stone
gentlemen
workers.
I think I'm
Those
speaking.
people that build these magnificent stone walls that are very crafted and cut and neat, and there's that kind of stone wall too. But there's others that are just plain old out in the pasture somewhere where they moved all the rocks and they put them into a row. And what it did was they used to have property borders that were made from wood fences. And what the stone walls did was they replaced the wood fences, and they were also used to
Right.
keep animals inside out in the field. You could build a three-wall thing and say, "Okay, cows, you stay in there." And so it's just fascinating how it works and how it developed.
Yes, yes. Now, what I saw in your background, it said most of your viewers know the play Arsenic and Old Lace, but few realize that it was based on reality. Can you tell us some more about that?
Exactly right. So in 1944, Cary Grant starred in the movie Arsenic and Old Lace that I saw as a child. And, it starts off as a comedy, and later you find out that the two women who were featured in the movie are killing men who are coming into the house and disposing of their bodies. And you just think they're the cutest little old ladies until you find out that they're murdering people.
Yeah.
And then you say, that's very bizarre. And then you find out when you grow up later that this actually happened in Connecticut. But the woman who was doing this, Amy Archer Gilligan, was actually doing it by herself. Her and her husband ran one of the very first nursing homes in the state of Connecticut. It was in Windsor. And their business model was you can either pay by the week or
Oh,
you give us $1,000 up front and you're in for life.
Oh,
and we'll take care of you for the rest of your life. Well, this sounded
oh,
very good.
yes.
$1,000, and I don't have to make any
That
more
wouldn't
payments.
go very far these days.
Well, not these days, but this was the late
Yeah.
1800s, so this sounded like a really good deal.
Yeah.
Except that what started to end up happening was they'd pay the thousand, and not too much later they'd be dead. And so she pocketed the money. They didn't have a very long life. And this was because her first husband died. She had a daughter with him. The daughter was going to private school. The expenses were steep. Her late husband had left her with some back taxes that were piling up. And so she turned to this life of crime. And what she realized was that if she could kill these people after they had paid her money,
Oh, dear.
um, it wouldn't cost her a lot in operational costs to take care of them because they'd be
Okay.
deceased,
Sure.
and she could have that money and get out of debt and do all the things she needed to do. Make a very long story short, she actually uh, people believe that she killed over a dozen people.
Good
She was
grief.
only ever tried and convicted for killing one, for which they had irrefutable evidence. The rest were, how do you prove this? Uh, one of the things she had done was to go to the local drugstore and buy several
Oh,
ounces of
okay.
arsenic. And
Okay.
in those days, if you bought poison, you had to go to the drugstore to buy it, and the drugstore was required by law to keep a registry.
Oh,
So
that's interesting.
The Hartford Courant went to the registries and saw that she had bought all this arsenic, enough to kill several hundred people.
Good grief.
Claimed it was for bed bugs and rats in her place, but
Sure.
nobody ever saw the rats or the bed bugs. But they did end up finding the arsenic, yeah, when they exhumed bodies and found the arsenic in the stomach.
So the
And
medical examiner was able.
well, yeah, the funny, it's not funny. Nothing about this is funny, but the odd thing about this is that there was one doctor who used to come in after all these deaths, and he just signed off on it, no big deal, until the Hartford Courant started getting involved. And there's no indication this doctor was on the take or anything else. He just
Yes.
wasn't very suspicious. And, they just figured, well, this person's old, they've died, and okay, let's
Yes.
move on. Well, it turns out that the funeral home that she sent the bodies to, in those days, when a body was embalmed,
Mhm.
the funeral directors used arsenic. The particular
Oh,
funeral home that she used had stopped using arsenic 18 years before that. So the deceased who had arsenic in them did not get it from the funeral home. They got it from her. And so anyway, she was convicted. She was sentenced to hang. She appealed that sentence and said I was insane. I shouldn't be hanged. She was convicted and sent to the hospital for the insane in those years in Middletown, Connecticut, and that's where she died at age 89.
wow. Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's quite a story. So well, I guess there was retribution. Was it such a thing as anything about civil suits back then? I mean, did families?
Yes, there was a suit, as a matter of fact, that was brought by one of I think it was a West Hartford family that was very upset about the care that one of their family members was getting.
Okay.
That was settled out of court, so there were no records on that, and she didn't get any publicity in the papers about that, and that kind of went away. And it wasn't until, and the way the Hartford Courant got involved was this guy died. His letters to his family, at the bottom of each letter, he used to keep tabs on how many people were dead and how many people were still living there. And so they would get these letters from him and his family and get these running totals at the bottom. When
Yeah.
he died, and he was relatively young, he was 60 years old, which was not terribly old.
Sure.
And he, in those days, and he, uh, in his papers, there was a letter from Amy, the owner of the nursing home, asking him for a secret $5,000 loan and just
Wow.
keep this between us. And she had told a couple that wanted to move in, they were at capacity, and she said, well, don't worry, there's going to be an opening at the beginning of June.
Sure.
And he died May 28th, and they moved in the first week of June. So the question is, did she then poison him? Well, they did exhume the body. They found the arsenic, more than enough to kill him. And so this is the
He's
one
kind of a
that
deep
got her.
throat. Yeah, he's kind of a deep throat guy.
Yeah, Yeah, so this is what got her finally in trouble, and the Hartford Courant got involved because the guy who wrote the obituaries for Windsor for the Hartford Courant lived next door to her place and noticed that soon as somebody died, the undertaker came in, which in those days was unusual. Sometimes the body would stay there for a day
Yeah,
or two before the
yeah,
undertaker came in. In this case, they were always there immediately, middle of the night, no matter when, and got the body out. And he thought that was odd too. He's the one who poked around in the drugstore registries.
were they doing cremation back then? In other words, did it always have to go to the medical examiner, or could she have had, burn up the bodies, or people would have asked questions probably?
9 times out of 10, people were buried without cremation. Yeah,
Oh, oh,
yeah.
okay.
Cremation was not widely used in those days.
I see. So you could still dig up bodies if you really wanted to find out things. Now,
Exactly.
where do you see, or what topics do you think that you might hit on in the coming? Because we want to give your podcast and contact information if people want to contact you directly. But what kinds of topics do you foresee you're going to be doing in the future so people are aware?
Well, there are a lot that I'm working on that I don't necessarily have right off the top of my head.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
for some that I have not yet published that I can tell you because they're fresh in my mind. Uh, the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont. Now, you might say,
Oh,
"Wait a second, isn't this a Connecticut podcast? Why are
right,
we
right,
talking
yeah,
about Vermont?"
yeah,
The Green Mountain Boys was a militia group, and we've all heard of the Green Mountain
yes,
Boys, right? I mean, there's coffee named after them and everything.
yeah,
Um,
right.
this militia was fighting for land grants in what was then the territory between New Hampshire and New York. There was no Vermont. But the people who started this militia to protect these land grants from people who were trying to take them away came from Connecticut. And you've heard of one of them, Ethan Allen. And the
For
other
sure.
one
Yeah.
was his cousin, Seth Warner. And between them, they ran the Green Mountain Boys. And so it's a great story of Connecticut basically creating Vermont, because without the Green Mountain Boys, you'd be calling Vermont today New York. That's how it was going to
I
be
see.
settled by
I
the
see.
British at that point in time, without the Green Mountain Boys getting in there. And they did some major support work in the Revolutionary War that actually, there's a famous story about the Battle of Saratoga, and because the Patriots beat the British at the Battle of Saratoga, the French said, okay, we're going to get involved. We're going to come to
Right.
your aid.
Yes.
The Battle of Saratoga became a Patriot victory because of work directly accomplished by the Green Mountain Boys. So there's a great backstory. It's an amazing story, and one that they deserve a lot more credit for than I think a lot of people know about.
Yeah.
But there's that one that's coming up. I also have one that's kind of fun. The first commercial parachuting operation in the U.S. and one of the first in the world started in Connecticut. And what do I mean by commercial? But that means,
Yeah.
let's say you wanted to, Susan, go out and learn how to parachute and
Yes.
parachute jump. You just wanted to take it up as a hobby. You wanted to have some fun. You would go and find a commercial parachuting company. Well, in the early days of the 1900s, there were no such companies. I've been able to find a guy who was there when this operation began at a grass airport in Roxbury back in 1940 something. He also himself personally has done hundreds of jumps, including, we believe he's the only human being to have ever parachuted into Central Park in New York City.
Is that right? Really?
Yeah, yeah, he's an amazing guy, Russ Wheeler. So we've got him coming up with a interview, whatnot, and yeah, and there's some other ones I'm working on. The in Fairfield is where some real important people from the Revolutionary War. This is why I probably shouldn't have started talking about this, because I'm going to draw blanks on some names. But there was a famous wedding. John Hancock was involved. I can't remember the name of the woman he was marrying, but a famous Bostonite,
Cousin or something.
probably in those days.
Those days.
Yeah. But anyway, he ended up John Hancock was the number one financer of the Patriot opposition to the British. That's how rich he was.
Okay.
And he came down to a mansion in Fairfield, owned by the Burrs, the same, Aaron Burr
I was going
family.
to say Aaron Burr, yeah.
Yeah, so the wedding was at that house. The British found out that he was there and they were coming to arrest him because they wanted to hang him for treason. And he found out about it and had to leave in the middle of his reception. So I've got an expert on that who I'm looking to interview, and that's going to be a lot of fun too.
Well, I think this is what's great about your show I'm very impressed with the reach, and hopefully you can take this link once it's completed to this interview and share that with the schools that you have spoken to. And as I said, anywhere you want to use that in social media, emails and so forth, but to the secondary schools, certainly our colleges. I honestly see this as part of what should become part of the curriculum in school these days. It is your show, or the mention of your show. Anyway, that should be because
There's a woman in Suffield. I think she teaches middle school, but I could have that wrong, who has already worked it into her curriculum.
Oh,
And
great.
she's asking me to go to the state to see if we can do exactly what you just recommended.
Okay. Well, it's been fascinating to have this
Thank
conversation
you.
with you. Please give your podcast site and how to contact you directly.
Absolutely. So it's www.amazingtalesct for Connecticut. So amazingtalesct.com. And you
Okay.
just go there, 175 episodes as we're taping. They're all for free. You just click and listen and have fun. And it's meant to be entertaining and informative. And I hope people get both of those out of
Great.
that. Thank you, Susan. I've appreciated it. And it's been fun talking to you too.
Oh, please, it's our pleasure and delighted to have you on today. And you can see all of our interview segments on ctvalleyviews.com. This is Susan Regan, host of Connecticut Valley Views, thanking our viewers for tuning in today.